You ever start a movie late at night after a long day with no intention of finishing it, but it pulls you in? Then you have to talk about it with your friends and family because it was so good or so bad? You, my friend, are not alone.
Welcome to the Midnight Watch Podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back. This is the Midnight Watch Podcast, the place where we discuss the movies that we all love, secretly love, and love to hate. We review movies 10 years old or older so we can see if the movie has made an impact on the industry or culture. I'm your host Jeremy along with my brother Josh, and this is looking to be a monumental episode.
I couldn't agree more, Jeremy. This might be the most iconic film we've reviewed yet. As you all might know, here at The Watch, we get into all the spoilers and hopefully you'll learn a few fun facts about this film. We give our reviews a rating in 4 categories. Number 1, did it hit its mark when it was released? Number 2, is it still relevant today? Number 3, for personal enjoyment. And the big one, number 4, is it a midnight watch? So, Jeremy, what landmark film are we doing today?
Well, Josh, we're looking at one of the films that kicked off an entire blood-soaked genre, scaring generations of fans and spawning sequels, reboots, and TV prequels. Boys and girls, put on your granny wigs and sharpen your chef knives. It's time to go back to the year 1960 for Alfred Hitchcock's legendary film, Psycho. Wow, man, you really hit that note. That was great. We had a little help from our producer.
I brought in a ringer. That was Lily.
That was Lily. That was great. I was like, dang. I looked up and I was like, wow. What can you not do? That was incredible. Well, that's awesome. All right. Let's get back in. Let's get into this right now. So, yes, we're reviewing Psycho, directed by Alfred Hitchcock. Came out in 1960, based off the book Psycho by Robert Bloch. And it had its screenplay by Joseph Stefano, music by Bernard Herrmann, and who also did the soundtrack for like Taxi Driver and Citizen Kane, another small budget film. And then let's see, the budget here was $807,000, and it made a box office of over $50 million. So that was a big jump.
Yeah, I say they made their money.
I think they did too. This movie is starring Anthony Perkins, Janet Leigh, Vera Miles, John Gavin, and Martin Balsam. I think that's how you say that. So yeah, there's a lot to talk about this movie. I'm like genuinely excited about this one. When it first came out, so a little bit of backstory real quick before we jump into the synopsis. This movie, Alfred Hitchcock had just made Vertigo and North by Northwest, which North by Northwest I think was up to that time like the biggest big budget movie that he had done. Big deal, like a huge budget in color, right. And he wanted to do something to pull it back in scale, and he was really excited with doing his Alfred Hitchcock Presents TV show. So he actually hired his TV show crew to film Psycho, which is pretty interesting.
I thought that was very cool. And when I was watching the movie, I was like, man, this feels like the Twilight Zone.
Yeah.
Just in the kind of TV vibe that it was putting off, but not in a bad way. It just felt different than, I don't know, a big major motion picture style, from the time.
Right. Well, especially since like I had watched The Birds and Rear Window, and just the style of that, like the high quality, and then you watch Psycho and it feels like kind of a down and dirty independent film, which is cool because this was Alfred Hitchcock like at his top, his highest,
for
his
sure.
best point. And so when he was like, you know what, I want to make a movie a lot more cheap, and he did it in black and white, which I thought this movie came out before a lot of his old movies because it was in black and white, which that was wrong. But
right.
Yeah, he did this in black and white for 2 reasons: so that he could show blood on screen and it wouldn't be super gory because of the censors. And then also black and white because it was way cheaper.
Sure.
But a lot of people didn't want to fund this movie, so that's why he did it so cheap. And yeah, this movie just blew away audience expectations like crazy, which we'll get into that after the synopsis.
Right. Well, let's do that then, and then we'll get down to the nitty gritty.
Let's do it.
So, During a lunchtime tryst in a Phoenix, Arizona hotel, real estate secretary Marion Crane and her boyfriend Sam Loomis discuss how they cannot afford to get married because of Sam's debts. After lunch, Marion returns to work, where a client leaves a $40,000 cash payment on a property. Marion's boss asks her to deposit the money in the bank and allows her to leave work early after she complains of a headache. Once home, she decides to steal the money and drive to Fairvale, California, where Sam lives. En route to Fairvale, Marion stops her car on the side of the road and falls asleep. She is awakened the next morning by a California Highway Patrol officer who follows Marion after questioning her and growing suspicious about her nervous behavior. Marion stops at a Bakersfield, California automobile dealership and trades in her car with its Arizona license plates for a new one with California tags. The officer spots Marion at the car dealership and eyes her suspiciously as she abruptly drives away. During a heavy rainstorm, Marion stops for the night at the Bates Motel and she hides the money inside a newspaper. The proprietor, Norman Bates, invites her to share a light dinner after she checks in. She accepts his invitation, but overhears an argument between Norman and his mother about bringing a woman into their Gothic home, which sits perched above the motel. Instead, they eat in the motel parlor, where he tells her about his life with his mother, who is mentally ill and forbids him to have a life apart from her. Moved by Norman's story, Marion decides to drive back to Phoenix in the morning to return the stolen money. Later, as she takes a shower, a shadowy figure stabs her to death. After seeing blood, Norman panics and runs to Marion's room, where he discovers her body. He cleans up the crime scene, putting Marion's corpse and her possessions, including, unbeknownst to him, the stolen money, into the trunk of her car and sinking it into the swamp near the motel. A week later, Marion's sister Lila arrives in Fairvale and confronts Sam about Marion's whereabouts. Private investigator Milton Arbogast approaches them and confirms that Marion is wanted for stealing the $40,000. Arbogast sleuths the local motels and discovers Marion spent a night at the Bates Motel. He questions Norman, whose stammering and inconsistent answers arouse his suspicion. After Norman implies that Marion met his mother, Arbogast asks to speak with her, but Norman refuses to allow it. Arbogast updates Sam and Lila about his search for Marion and promises to phone again soon. He goes to the Bates home in search of Norman's mother. As he reaches the top of the stairs, a shadowy figure stabs him to death. When Lila and Sam do not hear from Arbogast, Sam visits the motel. Sam sees a figure in the house who he assumes is Mrs. Bates, but she ignores his knocking. Lila and Sam visit the local deputy sheriff, who informs them that Mrs. Bates died in a murder-suicide 10 years ago. The sheriff concludes that Arbogast lied to Sam and Lila so he could pursue Marion and the money. Convinced that some ill has befallen Arbogast, Lila and Sam drive to the motel. Norman carries his mother from her room and hides her in the fruit cellar. At the motel, Sam distracts Norman by engaging in conversation while Lila cases the property and sneaks inside the house. After Sam grills him, Norman becomes agitated, knocks Sam out, and rushes to the house. Lila hides in the cellar where she finds Mrs. Bates in a chair. Lila turns her around and discovered she is a mummified corpse. Lila screams as Norman runs into the cellar, holding a chef's knife and wearing his mother's clothes and a wig. Before Norman can attack Lila, Sam, having regained consciousness, subdues him. At the courthouse, a psychiatrist explains that Norman murdered Mrs. Bates and her lover 10 years ago out of jealousy. Unable to bear the guilt, he stole her corpse and began to treat her as if she were still alive. He recreated his mother in his own mind as an alternate personality, dressing in her clothes and talking to himself in her voice. This mother personality is as jealous and possessive as Mrs. Bates was while she was alive. Whenever Norman feels attracted to a woman, Mother kills her. As Mother, Norman killed 2 missing young girls before stabbing Marion and Arbogast to death. The psychiatrist says the Mother personality has taken permanent hold of Norman's mind. While Norman sits in a holding cell, Mother's voiceover protests that the murders were Norman's doing. The last scene is of Marion's car being towed from the swamp. And once again, as is kind of been the case, this comes courtesy of Wikipedia.
Wikipedia, folks. There you go. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I was looking up a lot of facts about this, and there's a lot of facts about this movie. So, unlike Silver Bullet, which I had a hard time actually finding some trivia on that, I actually looked for trivia for an hour. So, anyways, This movie, though, I actually kind of got swamped in it. There's so much information about it because this movie is so controversial at the time and influential.
Right.
Like, this is definitely the most influential movie that we've done since we started, actually.
I agree. Yeah, hands down.
It's just, yeah. Let's before we jump into all the details, Josh, where was the first time that you saw this movie?
Well, sadly, the first time watching it all the way through was just recently when I reviewed it. It's one of those movies where I've known about it my whole life and how iconic it is. And I've when I took like drama class in high school, we discussed it a lot. And I've seen so many clips from the movie, but I'd never just watched it straight through. So it's like I felt like I knew the movie already, but it was cool. Definitely just watching it straight through for the first time, and it was awesome.
That's awesome, dude. I actually picked this movie because I wanted you to watch this movie. This is one of those few movies I feel like if somebody's a fan of movies, that they should watch this movie. Like, if you haven't seen this movie, like, stop the podcast now. We kind of already spoiled the story for you, but like, go watch the movie and then come back and listen to the rest of the podcast, because I saw this movie probably like 10 years ago and I started getting into Alfred Hitchcock movies, and I knew, like you were saying, Josh, like, I knew about this movie, knew about the infamous shower scene and that Norman Bates was the killer. I'm watching this movie, and Alfred Hitchcock, I know this, and Alfred Hitchcock convinces me still in the making of this, while watching this movie, where I'm questioning, like, is Norman Bates the killer? Because, like, he does such a good job of making you confused. And so when you have the big spoiler at the end of that it's actually Norman Bates, that has been killing everybody, like, that still surprised me. And so, I guess maybe I just...
Dude, and I would totally agree. I put that in my notes. I know it's coming. Like, I know the scene. I see what's about to happen, and I'm still just, like, tense. And then just that whole, oh my gosh, just kind of hits you when you see that. I mean, that's just how amazing Hitchcock was at getting you, sucked in. So it is amazing. Even knowing that it's coming, it's still fantastic. Oh yeah, absolutely. But also too, I jumped in this movie. I think this movie, I don't know if it's true or not, but this movie might have like the first jump scare, because like when Arbogast is going up the stairs to talk to Mother, and then she comes out of the room and just knifes him down the stairs. Like, the music kicks in, the whole, like, dun, 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 like when she's, like, calmly walking out of the stairs. And she just stabs him so nonchalant that it startles you. Yeah. And I thought it was awesome. So this movie also is pretty sure this is the oldest movie to be rated R. Now, this movie came out before the MPA rating systems came out in 1968. But they went back and started rating older movies. And so this one went from PG to PG-13 to PG-15, which I think is like, or PG-14 is like Canada's rating, to R. And I was talking to my wife about it, who did not watch this movie with me, actually. And I think this movie actually does merit an R rating still, because the violent sequences, actually, there's no stabbing on screen. Right. And I was just going to say, the off-screen violence is, impeccable.
Very intense. And I think this does still merit. It's a soft R, because basically besides two sequences of violence, there's no violence, there's no cussing. There's a little bit of sexual stuff, which is actually, I'll get into that a little bit later, because that has to do with censorship with this movie. Right. But, so the thing that there's a lot of stuff about this movie too that, like, for example, Janet Leigh, the main person in this movie, is probably...
I think it's actually Lee.
Lee, excuse me. That makes a lot more sense.
Which, you know who her daughter is, right?
That's what I was about to say, yeah.
Oh, man, look at us.
Jamie Lee Curtis, right there, the Scream Queen right there. So, yeah, it's cool. Because the thing is, Alfred Hitchcock played it so close to the chest with this movie. He bought as many copies of the book as he could before he made this movie, so nobody would know what the twist was. Right. And then that's
a baller move right there.
It is. It so is. And then also too, this was the first time that people weren't allowed to come into a movie after it started, because a lot of people would come into a movie like halfway through and watch the end of the movie, and then they'd wait and go to another showing of the movie and watch like the first half. I don't know why, but that's like what people were doing in the 50s.
That was a
and
thing,
stuff.
huh?
Yeah, and so he was like, he didn't want somebody to walk in and be waiting to see Janet Leigh, and she's nowhere to be found because she dies like 45 minutes into the movie, which this is the first time the main character has been killed off halfway through the movie, and you find out this movie's not about her. It's actually about Norman Bates.
It was so groundbreaking in multiple ways, whether it's how it was filmed or, I mean, that was a major Hollywood trope right there. You don't kill the main, person, the main actor.
Oh yeah.
Halfway through the film. What? That's crazy.
Yeah. You see that all the time now because of shows like Lost or Heroes and stuff like that, where they, especially The Walking Dead, where they love to kill off characters.
I think Game of Thrones was probably the biggest one, because that was just what?
Right. Yeah. I mean,
when they killed Ned Stark at the beginning of the first season, you're like, what do we do now? I mean, that was a huge shocker.
Yeah, you thought he was going to be the main character in the show.
Right.
Absolutely.
But you should have known better. Whenever Sean Bean's in something, you should know better.
He has died on screen more than 25 times. I literally just looked that up. But yeah, he's died on screen more than 25 times. If you want to have a great laugh, look up Sean Bean deaths on YouTube, and somebody edited together all of his death scenes with this like sad song playing in the background, and it's so funny. It's just like it keeps going and going, and anyways, that was just hilarious. But Sean Bean, he's a great actor. Let's see here. Yeah, so basically this movie got a bad rating though when it came out from critics. Mm-hmm. And the thing that was interesting about this is I believe that it's because Alfred Hitchcock didn't have any critic showings for this movie because he didn't want anybody to see it before it came out so it could be spoiled. So he had big signs in the theater saying, like, don't talk about the ending of this movie, that you cannot come into this movie once it started. So there was lines around the block of people waiting for the showing. When people were coming out, they were like screaming with delight and having fun. People were like, what happened? And apparently, unlike today, there was a lot of people, people weren't spoiling this movie, so you had to go see it. And that was just totally different than before.
Right.
So, yeah.
Well, he was already kind of a quirky, I don't know. Didn't really toe the line in general, I guess, as an actor, as a director. Mm-hmm. And this one, he went so rogue on everything about this movie. And, the studio's like, well, we're not going to fund you. And he's like, well, cool, I'll do it this way and I'll do it that way. And just, finding the workarounds on all of it. I mean, it was...
Right.
He's a master, no doubt.
Oh, yeah. Because the difference with this was he was at the end of his contract. Back in the day, directors and movie stars, they would get locked into a contract with, certain movie studios like Universal or Paramount or, United Artists and stuff. And you wouldn't be allowed to do movies for anybody else. You'd only do movies for Universal for 10 years. And once your contract was up, then you might be able to do movies for somewhere else. So his contract was up with Paramount, and this was right in the middle of him moving to Universal. So I think Paramount still has a credit on this, but yeah, he was in that weird limbo state. And they wanted him to do another big budget film because compared to North by Northwest, which came out the year before, which was budget of $4.6 million, this movie was $800,000, so that's a big difference.
Right.
And yeah, it was just pretty crazy. But he did a lot of different stuff. He finished filming this movie, and he was disappointed by it. Actually, he didn't think that it was that it was actually that good, and he was thinking about editing it down to an episode for his TV show. And then Bernard Herrmann came in and played the score with the movie, and it changed the movie 100%. So I'd be interested to watch this movie with the sound off and see how that goes, because originally he was going to have the shower scene be silent,
right?
But then Bernard Herrmann put that in there, and he loved it immediately. He was like, "Oh, this is great!" And so he said he actually gave Bernard Herrmann. Let me read this real quick. He doubled the composer's salary to $34,000. And Hitchcock later said 33% of the effect of Psycho was due to the music, which I 100% agree on.
Yeah.
This.
Well, even as the intro to the movie, the opening credits and whatnot, the strings right there are super engaging. I mean, it's immediately. I mean, you're just like, wow, this is intense.
Right. And when I think of a Hitchcock movie this is the soundtrack that comes to mind. It's just like, it's just pounding. It sounds off. It's scary. It's constantly on the edge of your seat. Like the entire time that there's music, it's you're nervous. Like when Marian's driving and she's just worried about in her head about stealing the $40,000.
Right, constantly checking the rearview mirror, and
Right.
she's super paranoid.
Like if she had not gotten murdered, I would have still watched the rest of this movie to see like what would have happened to her. And I forgot her boyfriend's name, Gavin. Well, that's the actor. Anyways, so by the way, the equivalency of $40,000 in 1960 that she stole.
Oh, right.
Was actually today. That's like $350,000. So because I was like when she stole $40,000, I was like,
yeah.
I mean, that's a fair amount of money, but like would that really get you out of that much? Which is another. I know I'm talking a lot about this movie, but another interesting thing. It may not make sense to today's audiences, but in the 1950s, like if you were a lady and you were hitting 30 years old and you hadn't settled down with a man yet, like you had the old maid syndrome, where
you were lost cause.
You were lost cause, and the fact that her boyfriend, like they were sleeping together, that was pretty controversial. Of having a hotel lay and stuff, but then he didn't want to make it official because he was behind, had tons of debt. Which now, like when I was watching, I was like, dude, just like obviously she doesn't care. Like just stay with her. Like because I thought like there was gonna be maybe like they were cheating on somebody, but yeah, there's no cheating. It's just
He's already divorced, so he's paying alimony and all of that. But I think the thing we forget, society wise, it was appearances were so much more of a thing back then than they are now. I mean, just we don't even know how serious that was. Like and his name was Sam in the movie.
Sam I Am.
Yes.
Awesome.
Sam Loomis.
Sam Loomis, which is funny. Sam Loomis. Who else has a character named Loomis?
Dr. Tell me, Jeremy.
No, Dr. Lewis. Dr. Loomis from Halloween.
There we go.
Yeah. There's a ton of movies that pay homage to this, and then like Arbogast, he's mimicked in several other movies. Just lots of different stuff. Yeah. So I'm hogging the mic too much, Josh. I can see you.
That's all right.
See you're getting bored over there.
You're no. Yep, I went and had a sandwich. Went for a walk around the block.
Watched an episode or two, something, and then came back.
Watch some Seinfeld.
There we go.
So no. This is definitely for sure a passionate topic for you. I know you really got into movies. I mean, not that we didn't like movies growing up. I mean, we've always been fans, but you really got into film as a passion. I think probably in late high school.
Yeah, I would say.
And I was newly married at that point, and I kind of, I don't know. I really started getting into it then as well. Probably a little bit because you were so into it, and it was kind of a cool way to bond, talk about stuff. Plus, our brother-in-law, Dave, he was a huge, movie nerd as well, particularly with horror movies, which hopefully everyone will get to meet him as we bring him on the show as a guest host coming up in good old Halloween season.
Yeah, we'll bring him in as the zombie expert since he introduced us to some of the best zombie films and worst zombie films. No,
no, it's true. It's true. But we say that with a lot of love for those terrible movies. So anyways, but yeah, this movie for sure as a film buff is, like you were saying earlier, you have to watch this movie. It has to be a part of something you've experienced to further enrich your love for film. It's amazing. And it's cool because not even as a fan of classic horror movies like we are, it covers so many other things. Like a lot of the shots in this movie are, you would see them in modern, I say modern, but in the last 20, 30 years, you would see some of the shots that he would make. But I feel like in the 40s and 50s, it was pretty standard fare. You had lots of like wide angle room shots, or I don't know. He did stuff with a camera on a boom and cycling up and around and coming down and from such, at the time, weird angles. And it makes the movie so much more expansive, I guess. You get such a broader feel for the environment.
Yes.
And like the opening shot that he does, which I guess they shot it from a helicopter, and it zooms all the way in from way out, and you see this hotel in the distance, and it zooms all the way up to the window, and then it goes, through the curtains or under the
windowsill.
The windowsill, somewhere like that. You come all the way into the room, which I think they had to cut that because it was too choppy from the. It wasn't stable enough like they can do it now. But anyways, that was such a landmark shot, which we take that for granted now. But seeing that from an older movie, which that being said, you and I watched a lot of black and white movies growing up because they were definitely not Hitchcock though. He was probably the devil growing up.
That was we were more of a Roy Rogers and Roy Rogers
for
and
sure.
Dale Evans fans for sure.
Yeah, definitely those the old westerns, but even some of the like Jimmy Stewart movies, not the Hitchcock ones, but like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington or some of those other more
Shop Around the Corner, different things like
more
that.
family friendly kind of ones.
Right.
You just didn't see these kind of camera angles and whatnot. So that I was really excited to see that.
Yeah.
Because like I said, we watched a lot of those old ones and loved them. I still love them, but I've definitely kind of fallen out from this movie made me want to go back and start watching older movies again because there's so much content being thrown at us these days. I mean, faster and faster. I mean, you can't keep up with it. So you miss something. You don't always go back to watch it, let alone try to catch up on stuff that came out years ago that, you could just watch old movies for a year and not see everything.
Oh, yeah.
I say old movies, but from the 50s and 60s.
Yeah. No, for a long time, actually, when I was just got out of high school, one of my goals was to see if I could watch every movie ever made. And you can't do that. There's just way too much stuff being made. Even when I was in high school, like 2004, 2005, like before like this massive streaming boom and stuff, like basically stuff would have to stop being made for 20 years if you want it. And even then, there's so much cinema out there.
Yeah.
But we were talking about the helicopter shot coming in. That was his plan originally, but they actually couldn't do that because they didn't have the stabilizers on the camera, so it was like super janky. So they had to do when it turns, they actually composed of 4 different shots of a standstill camera that's slowly zooming in as it's turning. So it hides the fact that it does kind of look like a helicopter shot, which is was pretty awesome. But they have
it's so smooth. The editing is insane on this movie.
Oh yeah, Alfred Hitchcock was famously known for, he was saying the most boring part of a movie is actually filming it, because he was so meticulous with the camera shots, the lighting, the lines, all of that before he even shot it. He knew exactly what the movie was going to look like. And actually, the thing is, if actors had a problem working with him sometimes because he didn't let them chew the scenery, where he's like, all right, let's do like a couple takes, do whatever you want. He was like, okay, so this camera is going to move from point A to point B in 4 seconds. So you need to move from sitting on that chair and move over and look at this item before you deliver your line, because the camera is going to be moving. So you need to have that done. And so some actors had a problem with that and some didn't, but he did have a fair amount of repeat actors that loved working with him.
Right. Well, you had to know what you were getting with him, which I think, and I don't know how it was back in the day with directors, but I know, in the last, again, 20, 30 years, you definitely have directors who actors want to work with that guy because he has a very specific way of doing it. Yes. And that's why you want to work with them. Yes. You're not trying to work with them so you can do your thing. You're like, please direct.
Right. Absolutely. You want that the acting credit of like, yes, I worked with this huge person, like Scorsese or Spielberg or,
right. Or Tarantino.
Yeah. All the different great directors of today. And the thing is cool is like the Hitchcock 2 was so influential that he basically created the suspense genre by himself. Like to be honest, I haven't watched that many old school foreign films. So I know like there was a slasher film that came out a couple years before this that Hitchcock wanted to buy the rights for the book, but I believe it was a French director grabbed it before him. And that movie, I can't remember the name.
French or Italian, but yeah, something
might have been Italian. But that movie though had an infamous like bath murder scene, and so they were this one though they were saying like this might have been almost a copy of that, but I'm not sure if that's the case at all. The thing that's interesting is this movie and a lot of serial killer movies that came out after this was very loosely based off the life of Ed Gein, who Texas Chainsaw Massacre is based off of this. Because Ed Gein was technically, he's not even a serial killer. Like, people think he killed more than 2 people, but they don't have proof yet. A lot of people did disappear at that point.
Right.
And he was the guy who would...
Well, he definitely was a body snatcher, though.
Right. Yeah, definitely body snatcher. They had tons of old bodies in his house and make furniture out of it, all kinds of other stuff. That
he was really a real arts and crafts kind of guy. You know?
Yeah, really. Yeah.
Before Pinterest and Etsy, you had Ed Gein.
He was the original Pinterest. Oh, man. Yeah, that's the knife tris. I don't know. Instead of Pinterest. But so this movie, though... There's some people that are saying if this movie had come out before people had caught Ed Gein and that became a sensational story, they would have thought this movie was just bonkers and not realistic at all. But
speaking of that,
yes.
So watching this movie, just I don't know, with the knowledge we have today of different true crime stories that have happened, and my wife is a huge serial killer, true crime nut. I mean, she watches all that stuff, before she goes to bed at night. That's what she likes to fall asleep to. Oh. Which, by the way, if I ever disappear someday, it'll be flawless. But this movie, as I'm watching it, I'm like, man, this doesn't even feel really like a horror movie to me. It feels like a true crime, psycho killer dude, which, I mean, it is. But there's so many... FBI, TV stories today, whether it's CSI or I don't know, any kind of cop show. There's a lot of, these types of criminal personalities have already come out and been profiled, and we know so many true stories about these types of people that it's nothing new to have somebody, a killer with multiple personalities, the serial killer type. Because I don't even think they knew about serial killers at that point. I don't think the FBI had even coined that phrase yet. So it's crazy how ahead of the curve he was on that. And it doesn't even feel like a horror movie to me, because there's so much real life that's happened like that. And you've seen it in so many different TV shows and movies since then. Not as horror movies, but as this is just, a crime story. Oh, yeah. No, absolutely. That totally makes sense. And this movie made the term psycho what it is now. Like, it had been used before. It didn't create that term, but a lot of people weren't really using it. But after the word psycho, like, the person just went crazy or whatever, or even like if somebody's gone psycho or whatever, then you hear like the music, the whole read, and then like that you do the knife thing, and so just that, like, it brought the word psycho into normal language. People know what that means. I think it's like Talking Head song, Psycho Killer, like, and then the music too. Aubrey hadn't seen the movie, and I asked her, I was like, what do you know about this movie? And she was like, well, somebody gets knifed in the shower. That's pretty much all I knew from this movie. And then she was like, the whole read. And so that is part of our American mythology now, is when you think of serial killer or psychos or anything like that, you think of, in your mind, somebody holding the knife, and you hear that music in your head. And I was scared once I heard about this movie. I was always scared to take a shower. Oh yeah.
And I didn't watch this movie for 20 years. So like that had this movie had an impact on me heavily, because as a child, and I had never seen this movie. So that shows just in one aspect at how influential it is. Like, you can just hear about a movie.
Right, and it'll scare you. Well, Janet Leigh apparently was so traumatized by filming the shower scene that she avoided taking showers the rest of her life.
Well, you're right and you're wrong. So they took 7 days to film the shower scene, and she was very comfortable while they were filming it, because it took over like 7 days, and what was it, 40 or 78 shots in 45 seconds. Crazy. And then she said when she actually saw the movie for the first time, that's when she realized how traumatizing it was, and how vulnerable you are in the shower. And she had never took a shower after that. She did baths. She was a clean person, but
she did bathe.
Yes, maybe sponge baths. But I just thought that would be pretty interesting hearing that, though. But she loved making this movie. She was disappointed, though, because she was hoping to develop a working relationship with Hitchcock after this, like many other actors and actresses had. And he told her, he said, I don't think we're going to be able to work together because of, and again, people are always going to think of you in this movie instead of whatever movie we're doing after this.
Right. I don't know how much. Well, no, I guess typecasting was still very much a thing in Hollywood, and for sure, she got typecast, and also, what's his face?
Anthony Perkins.
Anthony Perkins for sure got typecast.
Dude,
that guy was a working machine. I was just this morning. I was just reading up on his career, and oh my gosh, that guy, stage and screen, that guy was nonstop till he died.
Yeah, he was like a younger Jimmy Stewart. He had that kind of like really trustworthy kind of like, oh yeah, like of course you'd want your daughter to,
right, boyish good looks.
Yeah, exactly. Charming, relaxed. The fact that he was always eating that kettle corn in the movie, that was his choice. I thought that was kind of cool. That was like a
candy corn.
Candy corn.
One of my favorites as well.
That was because Brad Pitt always eats in like almost all of his movies,
right?
And so I thought that was just a cool little thing where he's just chilling and just eating some corn and
popping some candy.
Right, but he did get typecasted pretty strongly in this, which at first he was annoyed for a while, where he didn't want to talk to people about the movie, and then later in his life, he came back and made three sequels to it, which he directed one and helped to write another one. And he actually ended up saying, like, even though I got typecast in this, I loved being part of this. And so he actually came to really appreciate this role. Right.
Definitely embraced it towards the end. And that was some of the last stuff he did.
I didn't look into, like, I saw Psycho 2.
You saw Psycho 2?
I did, yeah. It was actually pretty good.
That's cool. Yeah, I haven't seen any of those. I would be interested to watch the second one.
Yeah.
They do that is a legit horror movie.
Yeah, they do an interesting thing where
say do a few more times.
Do. It's definitely though an interesting spin on what they do. I feel like they could have done a lot more stuff with it, honestly. And I do plan to watch the third and fourth one, but I'm not really. Basically, if I like one movie, I'll probably end up watching the rest of the series, because that's what I do. But
there's a lot of doo-doo in this episode.
There is. So going back to it, people were trying to figure out who was the killer in this movie.
Right.
So Alfred Hitchcock, even since Norman Bates is the killer and Mrs. Bates is dead the entire time, he even had a chair on set that said Mrs. Bates. So if like newspaper reporters or people were like happened to get on the set, which was very rare because it was a closed set, right. They would see that and think like, oh, that person's just offset. He put out a casting call for people for Mrs. Bates. And so that's another reason why people were just automatically assuming when they're watching the movie that, yeah, Mrs. Bates is the killer. So it just was mind blowing when that happened. That was pretty incredible. So this is the first time in a movie that a toilet is seen on screen, which is a pretty big deal. That made the movie more kind of grimy and true crime feely. And they even flushed the toilet, which is pretty intense. And then also, there's actually, so people say there's no nudity in this scene. Apparently there's one clip of a body double that they had that's bent over at the end of the shower scene where you can like barely see something. But Janet Leigh was not naked during this movie. She had like a gray moleskin bodysuit thing that she was wearing. And they since they filmed it over 7 days, they basically had time to set up all kinds of different camera angles. And then there's actually a rumor about this movie about right when the killer pulls back the curtain and that Alfred Hitchcock had them turn on cold water so she would scream really loud.
Right.
That's actually not true. So
that's a great story, though.
It is
I had heard that when I took my drama class way back in high school, and I always thought that was brilliant. So even though it's not true, it's a great story.
It is brilliant. Yeah, that's kind of like almost a Stephen King thing. If the legend's better than the real story, print the legend.
Right.
But yeah, Janet Leigh said though, like Alfred Hitchcock was very concerned about there always being warm water, so that way that she'd be as comfortable as possible while they were filming that scene. Yeah. And which is funny though, because he's like really concerned about her. He did not like Vera Mills, who played her sister Vivian. Like they had a falling out between when they made the movie before. So Vera Mills did not have a good time making this movie.
Vivian or Lila? What was her?
I think I said Marion. So Marion, and
the sister's Lila.
Lila, who's Vivian?
I don't know.
Anyways, Lila. That's what I was talking about.
Or Vivian, whoever.
Vivian.
The sister.
Her sister, yeah. Yeah, but she did not have a good time making this movie, which is funny. So I guess basically if Hitchcock liked you, then you had a great time. And if he didn't like you, you did not have that good of a time. So, yeah, that's pretty amazing, though. Just, yeah, that was that. This movie was pushing boundaries on all sides. They had a big problem with her, Janet Leigh being in a bra in this movie. And then John Gavin being shirtless. Like, that was extremely risque. And so, yeah, the censors, they wanted to cut that part completely out. And so he had initially made the scene a little bit more raunchy so that they intentionally would cut out part of it and then send it back. And then there was one part, too, where they had one guy that was editing or watching the movie. When the shower scene happened, he was like, "Oh, I saw a breast." And then Alfred Hitchcock was like, "Did you?" So they rewound it, played it again, and then he was like, "No, I guess I didn't." Because there's actually there's no nudity in that. It's just the scenes are cut so quick, and there's a reverse shot with a knife on her stomach that is pressed into her skin and then pulls out, so it looks like the knife's going into her stomach, but actually it's a reverse shot, so you don't see it. And so they sent it to the MPAA, or to the board censor. The MPAA wasn't made yet, and they were like, "Okay, you need to fix this and edit this down." So he waited like a week and then sent the movie back to them unedited, and then they were like, "Yeah, this works."
Right. I also heard he said, like, "Yeah, you can come in and watch the reshoot."
Yes.
And then they never showed up. So he was like, "Cool, here we go."
Yes, exactly. Like,
he was psychological on all of them beyond just what you see in the movie. I mean, he just master manipulator.
Oh man. And this movie does one thing really cool at the very end of the movie too, when they're having the voiceover of Mrs. Bates when it's showing Norman and he's just looking down and and then he looks up, he looks right at the camera. And she's all like, "I wouldn't hurt a fly." And then he looks right at the camera, and they superimpose a skull over his face for a second as they're changing scenes into the car being pulled out of the bog. Right. And that breaks the fourth wall. So that like really kind of gets under your nerve. Is like, "Ooh, he's coming for you next," which was very unusual. That just left you with an unsettling feeling. And then there's no credits at the end of this movie. It's just like, boom, and you could leave now.
Right.
So very unsettling.
Very. Yeah, I was just going to say, it's definitely a very mature film. I mean, even by today's standards, you're like, wow, this is very kind of erotic feeling between the very first scene when they're, I mean, you don't even see anything. It's just heavily implied that, okay, they were getting down and now, you know, it's time to go back to work and
they were
lunch break's over, but
they're sandwiches in the hotel room.
Right. And I'm sure the bra scene was, you know, hugely like, oh my Lord. And one thing I totally agree that Hitchcock definitely walks a very thin line between just going trashy on this movie. And I know that those like trashy B movies were a really big thing in the 60s. It started to really blow up. Yeah. Just really raunchy. I mean, they were definitely
talking about the nudie cutie movies going into the grindhouse films.
Basically, yeah. Those ones leading into that. And he walks that thin line of doing that, but he doesn't. He keeps it kind of tasteful. Yeah. And especially by today's standards. And, you know, it's just enough to kind of mess with you, but you don't ever see anything, especially during that whole shower sequence. I mean, those shots are so fast, you think you might have seen something, but it was so well done. I mean, a lot of it. That's why I love off-screen violence, and it's almost off-screen nudity. I don't even know. That's not even a thing, but you feel like, oh my gosh, I shouldn't be watching this, but you didn't see anything.
Right. Ridley Scott does that in a great job in Gladiator. There's several times where you think you see gore on screen, but then if you slow down and you watch like shot by shot, like it stops right before like that guy's arm gets cut off, and you just you imagine it in your mind. And I love that too. I feel like that's so cool. I mean, don't get me wrong, like on-screen violence and stuff like that is, when it's done right, like can be really impactful. And sometimes that's what they went for in grindhouse movies, was like, let's show everything. Right. But, which, to be honest, Hitchcock, if he had stayed alive another 30 years, like he would have definitely gone there, and because he was constantly pushing the boundaries. Yes. But I mean, he started movies. He was making silent films. That was for a long time. So Anyways,
it would have been cool to see what he would have done with actual on-screen violence and whatnot, because the fact that he was able to do it so well off-screen, which to this day I still love that. I mean, the early Tarantino stuff is just shocking, and you're like, and I didn't see anything.
right.
And it's so, I mean, he's definitely channeling some Hitchcock there. So I'm with you. As much as I enjoy seeing some quality on-screen violence or whatnot, that's done well. It can definitely be done very poorly and just be violent for violence sake, which most of the time doesn't work, in my opinion.
We talked about in Silver Bullet how the one guy finds his son that was all shredded, and the special effects were so bad they couldn't shoot that scene, so they just showed his face. And that was like the most impactful scene in the movie.
Oh, yeah. It was amazing.
It was great. So it looks like we're about to need to wrap up on time. So anything else you want to say about this movie before we go into final verdicts?
I think that's about it. It was very, very fun to watch, man.
Yes. It was awesome. Like I just really enjoyed it. I watched a lot of making featurettes about this. And
did you watch the biopic film Hitchcock with Anthony Hopkins?
I did, yeah.
5 or 6 years ago.
I did. Did you watch that?
I did, and I actually, just from what I remember from that film, I appreciate it even more after watching this and like you reading about the film and the making of it.
Right.
So it kind of makes me want to go back and rewatch that a little bit.
Yeah, that was a pretty great movie. That I will say.
Oh, one thing.
Yes.
I love how, and I don't know how many other directors were doing this at the time. I kind of don't think very many, but I love how he put himself in the background.
Oh yeah, he'd had a cameo in like every movie that he did.
Right, and I love that. I love that today. I mean, I love that when Shyamalan does that. I mean, there's a bunch of them do that
for a while.
Yeah, Sam. He's probably the most famous. Stephen King, which had to sneak himself into his movies. But that was super fun. So, and I knew that was going to happen, but I didn't know where. And it was cool seeing when she returns, to her office at the beginning of the movie, and he's standing outside the door,
right
on the street. I thought that was super cool. And did you know that the other secretary that she works with was his daughter?
Yes, actually, he wouldn't put her in his movies unless he felt like the part was actually right for her. And so this was one movie where she did it, and I thought she was actually a really charming character. I thought her character was pretty fun and happy. And this movie, actually, there's this thing that's called the Bechdel test. I think I'm saying that right. And that means it means there are more than 2 female characters with names. 2 of them have conversations about something besides men. And like, so basically, if you watch a movie and if women in the movie are by themselves and they have a conversation that's not about men, then that passes the Bechdel test. And so there's a lot of movies that don't pass this test. And so this movie does. Like Marion and her, they talk about work and they just talk about not feeling good. And then there's the other conversation between Vera Miles and the sheriff's wife, and they talk about like, hey, let's make some food and stuff. And so like that's just it creates characters that are actually more fully fleshed out. And these are real people. These aren't just women that are there for the sake of serving whatever the men do in this.
Right.
Like Vera Miles' character, very influential in this, and Marion Crane, obviously, very serious character in this. So very cool though. Like that's pretty awesome.
I agree. I had not heard of that, so that's awesome. Very cool.
So any last thoughts?
Nope. Let's give our ratings.
Okay. So let's see. Did it hit the mark when it came out?
Yes, by a landslide. This shattered expectations and beyond.
Yes, this blew the doors off. It is Alfred Hitchcock's most popular and most famous movie that he's ever done. This movie's, it hit hard. Some people actually left the movies like running out of the theaters. Like, it's the Passion of the Christ of the 1960s. And it was pretty intense. Right.
For sure.
That's the tagline for this movie now. The Passion of the Christ, 1960. Maybe
I'm sure that'll stick.
A little bit less spiritual and
just a little.
Just a little. All right. What was the next one?
Next one would be it's
our own show. We don't know what we're even supposed to be doing.
No, is it relevant today? Sorry, there we go.
Oh yes, I would say absolutely.
Yeah,
this movie has wove its way into our, like I said, American mythology. Like people reference this movie, whether they've even seen this movie or know they're even referencing this movie. Like, it's just, it's part of our culture now. And so, yeah, 100%.
And it has influenced filmmaking. Just, I mean, we might even never know how much it's, you know, the long lasting effects this movie's had on filmmaking in general.
Yes.
Let alone the story. Yeah, for sure. That's absolutely an A.
Yeah, I
for,
feel like
for relevance today.
This is one of those times in movie history where it's like there's a time before this movie and there's a time after this movie. And as much as I'm not like a huge Star Wars fan, the first Star Wars movie was another one of those ones where it was like before Star Wars and after Star Wars.
Oh yeah.
And so this was definitely like that shower scene changed cinema in the way that we do movies and certain things now.
Right. 100%.
All right, Josh. Okay, so we did A+ with it did hit its mark. A+ is still relevant today. What's your personal enjoyment on this?
I give it a B.
A B?
It was, yes. I enjoyed it a lot. Definitely it influences how I see other movies. Not quite there for an A for me, but for sure I give it a B+ even.
There you go. I'm with you on that. I give it a B. I actually like some of Hitchcock's other films personally more than this. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely give it a B. Like, I like this movie. It was fun. And it's like I said, if you haven't seen this movie, you have to see this movie. If you are a fan of cinema, you have to see this movie. This is one of the ones that's like, it's on the list of like movies to see before you die, but seriously, watch this movie. Like, if you find it kind of boring, drink some alcohol. Watch this movie,
or some coffee,
or some coffee. Yeah,
you might need caffeine to stay engaged.
Yeah.
All right, the big one. Is this a midnight watch for you?
Not for me. Like, it's a great film, but not for me. What about you?
I am with you on that. I wouldn't say it's a midnight watch, but after having this conversation with you, it kind of would make me pause at this point. If I saw it on, I think I would want to sit and watch it a little bit. So I give it a half a midnight watch.
It's a twilight watch. You know, it's not quite midnight, but not quite daytime.
Right. I think I would, depending on the scene that pops on, like I might watch it for a few minutes.
It depends. Yeah, it does depend on what part of the movie it's in, because there's like different sequences in this movie that are very monumental, and it's just fun to watch those scenes.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the shower scene for sure you would stop and watch. I mean, that's a no-brainer. You're going to sit and watch that. But if she's just driving in the car,
right.
Maybe not. Though I did love all the conversations she has in her own mind.
Oh yeah.
When she's paranoid and she's thinking, well, this is what they would be saying right now. Because I do that, about things in general.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
What other people might be thinking. So, I mean, I think I might, depending on the scene. It's definitely not, in my opinion, a true midnight watch like some of the other ones we've looked at, where I feel like almost every scene in the movie is entertaining. Not that this movie is. I'm going to stop there. You know what I mean.
You know what I mean. You
know what I'm saying.
Well, that wraps up today's episode. If you want to check out this movie, I actually own this movie. Josh, where did you watch this movie?
I found it for free to stream on the Peacock TV app. There's actually a lot of really good content on there. There are commercials, but I didn't find them too long to kind of break up watching the movie. So that's a pretty good app.
You mentioned that I did watch it actually on the app, even though I own this movie. I watched all the extra stuff on the movie, on the DVD. I actually, to be honest, so watching it free on Peacock is great, but there was a couple times where something happened and it went to the next scene and went into the commercial and it threw me off.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's definitely not good to watch a movie with commercials. It definitely isn't.
Yeah.
But if you want to be cheap, this is a way to do it. Otherwise, I would totally recommend renting this movie, or you can't go wrong buying it either.
Absolutely.
This is a classic worthy of any film lover's library.
Dude, speaking of libraries, the library has tons of movies that you can rent.
Yes, support the local library.
Yeah, go out there.
It's more than books.
That's literally what I did. Had to see tons of movies back in the day. I would rent 5 movies a day, watch them all, and then go back and the next day. I have like 60 or 70 movies in my queue that I work through.
Yeah, this day. I mean, our local library has a ton of Blu-rays. And, I mean, they're just and DVDs, obviously. But yeah.
Yeah, books are cool too.
Yeah, go read a book.
Go read a book, please.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Are we ready for the quote though for the next movie?
Well, not yet. I got to say special thanks real quick.
Okay.
Special thanks to our sound producer, Jake Colvin. If you shared this or if you enjoyed this episode, wait a minute. I jumped over that.
Well, I was wondering about that.
Sorry,
folks.
Guys. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. What about that quote, Josh, for next week? What's the quote?
All right. You play a good game, boy, but the game is finished. Now you die.
Special thanks to our sound producer, Jake Colvin. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd love it if you shared it with your friends or anyone you think you would like it.
Yes, and please hit that old subscribe button. We'd love a 5-star rating if you're listening on Apple Podcasts. We're also on Stitcher, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and a whole slew of other podcast platforms. And hey, if you'd like to contact us, which we'd love to hear from you guys, please contact us. You can hit us up on our email, themidnightwatchpodcast@gmail.com. We're also on not Twitter. We probably should do a Twitter account, but we're on Facebook and Instagram. So please, any thoughts, comments, criticisms, whatever. We'd love to hear feedback or just conversate with y'all.
Absolutely. We're starting to get some feedback from different people regarding their favorite midnight watches. Love talking about movies. So definitely keep it up. You guys have an awesome week. And as always, keep up the watch.